As Cheryl said, our theme for the month of July is cycles of life. In our usual conversations, we don't get a whole lot of opportunity to talk honestly about our own mortality. We'll explore it from a few different angles this month. You might say it comes at a good time in the middle of the summer when there's plenty of sunshine and ice cream to make this conversation a little more comfortable. But really this month, as we talk about mortality, what we're mostly learning about is living well. A Buddhist meditation group that I'm a part of was reading the book Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet by Thich Nhat Hanh. And a few weeks ago, one of the readings explored the Five Remembrances. Hearing those, I knew immediately that I needed to bring it to Tapestry this month. There are several different points of entry for exploring Buddhism. You most often hear about the Four Noble Truths. I've definitely preached a handful of sermons on those. But the Five Remembrances are a similarly concise way to cut to the heart of Buddhist thought. The Buddha advised, "These are the 5 facts that one should reflect on often, no matter their gender, lay or ordained." So they are: I am of the nature to grow old. I cannot avoid aging. I am of the nature to have ill health. I cannot avoid illness. I am of the nature to die. I cannot avoid death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love is of the nature to change. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. Now, these 5 remembrances are usually used as a meditation tool or a point for personal reflection. That's why they're short enough to be memorized and sort of recited silently in your head. And I know at first glance they can be very, very depressing. But they can also be very liberating. Acknowledging these 5 real facts is intended to wake us up from a state of denial. Facing life on life's terms can be tremendously grounding and exciting. Buddha offered them as an awakening, not a reason to be depressed. So if you're already squirming with this focus on aging, sickness, death, and impermanence, let me offer a bit of a more hopeful version with a similar message. As I read up on the 5 remembrances, I found that there's a corresponding piece of Buddhist writing called the 5 divine messengers. The first divine messenger is a newborn baby. So how's that for happy? A newborn baby can be the best messenger of the true nature of life. For a moment, I want us all to bring to mind the experience of being in the presence of a newborn, not the idea of it, but the actual experience. When we encounter a newborn, even if we don't have a particular philosophy, we're struck by something really powerful. In that little face, we see all of it. We see something so perfect. And at the same time, we know that it can't remain. We see something perfect, and we know that it can't remain. We would never wish for that baby not to grow up or to get older. And at the same time, when the child does get a little older, we may not be able to see its perfection quite so clearly. So there's a little bit of a sense of loss. In the presence of a newborn baby, there's an understanding that this moment is temporary. And at the same time, it's so complete. This is the nature of all life, not just infancy, but every day and every moment. It's beautiful and temporary. We wouldn't wish to remain in that moment forever. And yet there's a sadness at change as we let go. There's so much to explore in the Five Remembrances. Before we dive in depth, maybe the simplest question is, which of these do you accept easily, and which of these makes you squirm or has your heart fighting against it? I'm of the nature to grow old. I'm of the nature to have ill health. I'm of the nature to die. All that is dear to me and everyone I love is of the nature to change. My actions are my only true belongings. Which of those is the most, which are you comfortable with? Let's start there. And which is the hardest? The first remembrance, looking around this room, we've all faced to varying degrees. I am of the nature to grow old. I cannot avoid aging. Among the many blessings of ministry, I count the opportunity to be in a multi-generational community. Particularly for this conversation, the opportunity to spend time with people who are older, who are not my parents or family members. It's difficult to see family members outside of their particular role. But here I get to be with people without that distortion filter of family relation. I get to be with proud, capable people who have faced their physical limitations, and sometimes people whose cognitive ability becomes impaired. I do my best to learn what I can. I learn both how to accept the changes that aging brings without being complacent. There's a middle path to be found in aging, it seems, somewhere between acceptance and preserving vitality. I'm grateful for the many teachers I have here. Also, being in this multi-generational community, I learn how to appreciate my own particular age, 43. Being with you reminds me that this age that once seemed old will soon seem very young. So this year, I'll try to embrace the uniqueness that 43 brings before the next year knocks at my door. I mentioned before the divine messengers. The first was a newborn baby. The second divine messenger is, quote, a bent-over, broken-toothed old person. Now, aging looks a little different in 2022 in Orange County. The point here is, every time we see someone who's older, someone who's felt the challenges of age, that person is a divine messenger, appearing to remind you that you too are of the nature to grow old. Don't look away or deny that reality. Quite the opposite, say thank you. Thank them for the opportunity for awakening, just like a newborn baby offers. The second remembrance is probably the scariest for me. I think it is for a lot of us. We may fight against growing old, but we're pretty clear that it's going to happen. And we're also pretty clear that one day we will die. What's a little harder to accept is the fact that we will all experience ill health. All of us. We are of the nature for that to happen. In the tradition, it says that the next divine messenger is a person who's suffering from illness. This messenger is a bit of a departure from what we typically think of in Western world. We've heard and been told many, many times that when encountering someone with ill health, someone who's suffering, that we should count our many blessings that we are not suffering in the same way. When we encounter sickness, we should focus on gratitude for our own health. But the second remembrance in Buddhist tradition brings a different message. It says, don't kid yourself. That person is showing you the nature of life. You may not feel it acutely in the moment, but this is what it means to be human. And that's okay. In seminary, I had a great opportunity to take a class on disability theologies. It was really amazing to dig into how that perspective of disability can transform understandings of God. The biggest takeaway for me for that class, though, wasn't a piece of theology. It was a very simple phrase, temporarily abled. There are two types of people in the world, disabled and temporarily abled. I am of the nature to have ill health. The third remembrance is I am of a nature to die. It's no surprise that the divine messenger that coordinates with this one is someone who is dead. In our U.S. culture today, encountering a dead body is a very, very rare occurrence for us. What isn't so rare is remembering someone we once knew or seeing a picture of someone. So in those moments, if it occurs to you, you might take the opportunity to consider that you one day will be dead too. And that's not punishment. It isn't unfair. It's just who we are. And in the very next breath, remember that today you are alive. This is in some ways the most dramatic of the five remembrances. It's likely one that you have heard people talk about and maybe one that you've thought about. We'll get more conversation of that in future Sundays. Not only that, I promise. We'll talk about other things too. The fourth and fifth remembrances are where things get really interesting, I think. All that is dear to me and everyone I love is of the nature to change. In Buddhist talk, this is called impermanence. Change is the nature of reality, not sameness. One of the most important things we can learn to embrace is the fact that everything and everyone changes. That can sound scary. But bring to mind the question of vitality. Being attached to something or someone based on a denial of change is kind of lifeless. Even if that's a very solid object, say a collectible baseball. When you hold on to that in a static way, you don't allow the meaning to evolve as you age and your memories of that time develop and change. It's even easier to see in friends and loved ones. In real loving relationships, we seek to grow together, not to suffocate, holding on to a static moment in the past. When we're too attached, when we attempt to freeze dry different elements of our life, we squeeze out the vitality from them. Non-attachment or embracing change allows us to enjoy life wholeheartedly in the midst of its ever-changing reality. The fifth remembrance is perhaps easier embraced than it is lived out in real life. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. Sometimes it's just hard. It's easy to get distracted by the shiny objects and the accolades that come from achievements, even when we know it's our own private actions that really matter. One helpful window for me in looking into that fifth remembrance is the idea of character and how our actions create our identity over a very, very long time. Often character doesn't really get recognized until our life is remembered in its entirety. Most of us have been to at least a few memorial services or celebrations of life. And at those services, the most touching stories are always the ones that demonstrate a person's character. Those stories are always more interesting than the list of achievements. It's the nature of our actions, the way in which we loved and cared for others that we'll be remembered by. The Reverend Arthur Lavoie wrote, "As we remembered my mother, a housewife and mother, there were no great accomplishments to speak of, unless you count raising 7 children and losing 2 of them, or perhaps the accomplishment that we could not recall an ill word ever said of her. And the stories about her life that we told, it was the qualities of loving and caring that she will always be remembered for. A good woman who would do anything for her family and friends. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. They are the ground upon which I stand." Contemplating the impermanence of our lives and the fact that change is the only constant isn't a place that we go easily in our hearts. But these very basic truths can serve as a foundation for living more deeply in the present moment. I'm of the nature to grow old. I'm of the nature to have ill health. I'm of the nature to die. All that is dear to me and everyone I love is of the nature to change. My actions are my only true belongings. This is not easy for the control freak in me. Slowly but surely, I'm learning to enjoy a sense of freedom and joy that can be found in letting go. Appreciating our changing world and our changing self is a whole lot easier than fighting against the very nature of reality. Amen.